Everyone knows a sound that pulls them out of whatever they're doing, like the creak of a particular floorboard, an old ringtone somewhere in a crowd, a stranger calling your name. There are these little buttons in the back of our minds that can stop our thoughts and put us straight into the here and now. I want to tell you about one of those sounds and why it haunts me to this day. Back when I studied at MSU, I had a pretty tight-knit group of friends. There were 8 of us at one point, spending almost every day together. It was equal parts study circle, drinking buddies, and group therapy. But as our studies and lives progressed, they dropped off one by one, relegating themselves to inactive group chats and the occasional Instagram like. Many moved across the country to pursue their careers. 3 of us stuck around. There was me, a fresh sociology major with a budding career in business development consultation. There was Greg, the life of the party. He had that look of someone born to wear dad khakis. And finally, there was Stuart, the kind of guy who keeps getting knocked down but gets back up with a smile, always chasing opportunities and never saying no. Over time, our escapades calmed. Wild pub crawls turned to the occasional night in the town, playing pool, singing karaoke, or watching a game at a sports bar, on wing night, of course. Those days would usually play out the same way. Greg would message us with some idea, Stuart would pull me along, and that would be that. It was a nice routine and a clean break from the minutiae of work. We were all single at that point, sharing the woes and tribulations of modern dating. Whenever somebody was ghosted or got stood up, there was always a friend ready to hear us out. Greg started seeing this girl, and all of a sudden, it was just me and Stuart left. The group chats grew further and far between. Stuart and I ended up spending a lot of time together, turning a once booming group into a solid wingman team. Stuart wasn't the kind of guy to hit on women left and right. He was looking for that special someone. He grew up in a religious household and was the second oldest of 5 brothers, so there was some expectation that he would find his way eventually. And that was part of why he kept up his cheery demeanor. He had faith that God was cooking up something good for him. So at the end of every night when we drunkenly stumbled to an Uber, he would do this thing where he bobbed his head and snapped his fingers, like he was listening to a song that nobody else could hear. Snap, 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 snap. He explained it as a sort of tick. Now when you got the beat, you gotta let it out, he would say. Gotta keep the music going. When it stops, you stop, you know. It was his way of keeping the mood up despite everything. Whenever he got nervous, anxious, or just plain old sad, he would snap his fingers like someone trying to pull start a dried up engine. It worked most of the time. I did see him get upset, but it was mostly about things out of his control. Showing up late to a club after getting stuck in traffic, only to end up at the back of the line, and getting stood up on a Hinge date. He was stuck in a job that he hated, in an apartment that had a roach problem. He would try to pass off his second-hand clothes as vintage rather than cheap, but there was a whiff of mildew to them that wouldn't go away. But through it all, he kept his smile up and his beat going strong. Snap, snap. It was late July when Stuart came to me with a plan. He was going to go out with this girl, Nicole, and he wanted to see if we could turn it into a double date. I was fairly active on the dating scene, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was starting a career and looking for a place to settle. I didn't even know if I was going to stay in the same state. But still, I had a friend at work who had offered to set me up with a blind date, and so I agreed. Stuart was hyped, to say the least. "You gotta meet her," he wrote. "Nicole is perfect. I'm telling you, this is it." I had seen Stuart's musing before, so this wasn't out of the ordinary, but he made a tad more effort than usual, and for Stuart, that counted for something. I decided I would make an effort to prop him up and be a good wingman. The guy could use all the help that he could get. When the big night rolled around, we met up at my place before heading out. Stuart had spent some of his salary on a new shirt and pants. He tried to fix his hair in a way to fake a fresh haircut. It looked nice, different. The shirt was a bit too large, making his already skinny arms look even skinnier, but you could tell that he was trying. He was excited, snapping his fingers quicker than usual. I got a good feeling about this. This is our 4th date. It's going places. I was happy for him. I offered to be the DD and he made some suggestions how I could wingman him a bit. He told me about Nicole's many likes and dislikes, her demeanor, and he kept showing me pictures of her. He was right, she was gorgeous. But the way he described her as a person made me think of a mean kindergarten teacher. We met up with Nicole and my blind date at a bar downtown. My blind date was a bookish woman with a shy smile and Harry Potter-style glasses. Adorable, but clearly out of her comfort zone. We all made introductions and the evening was on. I think Stuart was nervous. He kept getting mojitos for him and Nicole, but she barely managed to finish her first before he was on his 3rd. He was sweating like a leaking hose, and his 100-mile-per-hour style of questioning sounded less like genuine interest and more like speed interrogation. Meanwhile, my blind date spent most of her time texting in the bathroom. It got to the point where the one I ended up spending the most time with was, ironically, Nicole. Whenever Stuart walked off, she would let out a sigh. He can be a bit much, I said, but he's a great guy. Yeah, I believe you, she said. He's been great. How he gets this way when he's excited, kind of like a golden retriever. I'm not much of a dog person. Figures. She rolled her eyes at me and I rolled them right back. That cracked a smile. You're more of an iguana person, I added. Tell me I'm wrong. Yeah, cold-blooded all the way, she snorted back. That or a fruit bat. They seem chill. My blind date excused herself after about an hour, leaving me as the awkward third wheel to an already awkward date. Stuart ended up spending most of the evening in the bathroom trying to keep a 4th mojito down, while I tried to keep Nicole from walking out. We ended up having a pretty good talk. A lot of what came off as cold and distant about her was just sarcasm, and if you looked past it, you could see that she was a genuine person. She listened with intent and could really make you feel seen. By the time we left the bar, it was dark and there was a distant thumping of music and cheers. Stuart gestured at me to go ahead, but Nicole shook her head, silently asking me to give them a minute. I stepped away but saw the whole thing from across the street. She was shutting him down hard. I didn't need to hear the words. I saw the inflated body language. She gave him a best of luck kind of hug before leaving. Stuart just stood there, not even snapping his fingers anymore. There was an emptiness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. She was the one, he said, and there she goes. Stuart was crushed. He tended to get his hopes up too fast and it kept coming back to bite him, but this time it was really bad. At one point, I got in touch with Nicole online just to see if I could push things along. I asked her if it was something that he did or if there was something that he could do to fix it, but she made it clear that it was a matter of preference. She had nothing but good things to say about Stuart, but things weren't going to go any further, and that's how she and I got talking. It wasn't anything serious, just the occasional rant about something going on in our everyday lives. It wasn't even flirty, she was just fun to talk to. She always had a quip about something ready to go. There was never a dull moment or needless silence. And after about a month, we decided to go on a date of our own. It wasn't meant to be a behind Stuart's back kind of thing. I wanted to talk to him about it eventually, but he was still pining for her. I felt a bit bad about it, but Nicole made it very clear that she was moving on. She couldn't have made it clearer. So, while I didn't want to disappoint a friend of mine, I also wasn't about to pass on a good thing. Nicole and I clicked almost instantly. I've never met a woman that can make me belly laugh to the point where my stomach hurts. She had absolutely no filter, and I really felt like I could open up around her. We had a great time, and it was evident that this wouldn't be the last time that we saw each other. One date turned into several, and before I knew it, I couldn't imagine my days without her. Stuart was still struggling, but he kept his smile up. Snap, snap. We'd talk every other day or so, and I would ask how things were going. He would try to find a positive spin to anything and everything. "I got a like, but I think it's a bot," he would say. "But hey, AI girlfriends are all the rage these days." Or something like, "It's just a couple roaches. Hey, at least it's not bedbugs. That would have sucked." He tried to keep it all together and tough it out. I'd help him out whenever I could, but sometimes he was his own worst enemy. He'd be so focused on plans at 10 years from now that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. It was only a matter of time before he found out about me and Nicole. He saw us at one of the local hangouts. I had my arm around her as she casually explained her latest hyperfixation. By the time that I noticed Stuart, there was no way to hide it. He didn't do anything stupid or dramatic. He just waved, snapped his fingers, and left us alone. But I could tell that there was something more to it. Something about the way he moved reminded me of a gazelle ready to sprint, like he had this pent-up energy ready to burst. I watched as he walked up to the bar, stayed there for a couple of minutes and didn't order anything, and then promptly left. Later that night, I texted him. I apologized and explained that I wanted to wait until he was in a better space before I told him. All I got in response was a smiley face. Over the next few weeks, things got serious between me and Nicole. She ended up spending most of the time at my place, and I started to notice little things of her popping up around my apartment. I didn't mind. She was getting comfortable, and that made me comfortable in turn. But Stuart hung over us like a ghost. Whenever we saw him, he would just stand there quietly snapping his fingers, always with that same forced smile. He stopped responding to my texts and messages and giving me nothing but an occasional smiley in return. "We're playing pool tonight. You want to tag along?" I would ask. Smiley face. "Hey, you okay? We thought about seeing the new Alien movie. We got an extra ticket." Smiley face. After a while, I just stopped talking to him. Things took its course. A couple of months would pass, and Nicole and I talked about moving in together. Stuart was far from our minds, and we had moved on. I was on the verge of getting a promotion at work. The guy who was my senior was about to retire. We thought about waiting until then to get a bigger place. I had met her parents, and she had met mine. We had done all the serious couple things without ever defining ourselves as such. And then I got a call from Greg. I was surprised. I hadn't heard from him in a while. "Hey man, we gotta talk," he said. "In private." I had never heard Greg use that tone before. Something was up. We met at a cafe later that day. The dinner rush had just passed, leaving behind a gaggle of murmurs as customers lingered behind their empty plates. Greg and I just had a coffee, huddling up in a corner by the window. "I went to see Stuart. Haven't heard from him in a while," Greg said. "You ever been to his place?" "No," I admitted. "Heard it was a shithole though." "It's fake. A fake address, a fake everything." "What?" And Greg showed me a couple of images from his phone. He had checked out the address that Stuart was registered at, but the place was a Chinese restaurant. His job's the same thing. I went by to check on him. They've never had a Stuart working there. "You heard anything from his family?" "No names, no numbers. He only mentions them in passing. So we got nothing. We don't know anything." Apparently, he was never signed up for any classes at MSU, couldn't find his name anywhere. So this guy just showed up one day and we got nothing on him. And pretty much, yeah. For the better part of an hour, we dissected all we knew about Stuart. We didn't know where he had lived, what he did for work, or even how old he was. On his socials, he just referred to his last name as the letter P. And the more we cataloged, the more we realized we didn't know this person at all. Not like we thought we did. But there was nothing that we could do. We couldn't reach him, and there was not much that we could say. Yeah, the guy was trouble, but we had no idea what kind of trouble. He hadn't really done anything. We couldn't call the cops on somebody just for being private. So in the end, Greg and I could just nod at each other and agree that this was all just weird. I went to see Nicole that night to tell her about all of it. A wind picked up in anticipation of the coming rain, making the trees crackle and bend as I hurried down a long street. As I reached Nicole's door, I stopped. I don't know what compelled me to do so. I looked across the street. I don't think there was anyone there, but it felt like I was looking somebody straight in the eye. And I heard it, I think. Or maybe I imagined it. Snap, snap. I stayed up for a couple of hours talking to Nicole about what we had discovered. Nicole was worried, but there wasn't much that we could say or do. I had texted Stuart everything from apologies to just asking him to stay away, but I never got more than a smiley in response. Nicole didn't know what to say. That night as we went to bed, she turned to me, nuzzling up against my shoulder, melting away the anxieties of the day. He always had this vision, she explained, like he already had our story planned out. He thought we were gonna fall in love and move in together and be a cute, mismatched couple. But I was never really part of the conversation. Yeah, that sounds like him. And do you think he's still trying to tell that story? It wasn't impossible. Stuart had a penchant for being a bit dramatic, and he sure as hell could stick to an idea. But this could mean anything in practice. There was no way to tell. I held her close that night, listening to her drift off to sleep. And as she did, I wondered if I could hear that snapping from outside if I listened hard enough. The next day began no differently from any other. We got dressed, had breakfast, and went our separate ways. We waved our goodbyes and promised to text and call throughout the day. She was going to come over to my place later that night. That's not what happened though. Somewhere around 2 p.m. I started getting messages, someone from Nicole's job, and then a friend of a friend, and then a text from an acquaintance. Panicked phone calls, invites to group chats, and then the police. Apparently at 1:47 p.m., 3 masked men had pulled Nicole out of her car at a red light. A van was seen heading south, crossing the highway and disappearing into suburbia. One of the masked men were seen snapping their fingers, like a tick. I've never had something like this happen before. You don't even hear about these things on the news around here. Someone getting pulled out of their car at a red light. How does that happen? 2 police officers came to see me at my job. As the significant other, you're immediately at the top of the suspect list, but I had plenty of people to vouch for me. I rambled on and on about Stuart and how he had been this thorn in our sides for weeks, but they were very dismissive. We're pursuing several leads. One of them assured me, we'll keep in touch. I was given some contact info and then they were on their way, leaving me gutted in the break room. Trying to imagine what was going on made me sick. I spent a good 10 minutes in the bathroom trying to keep my head from spinning. All the while, my phone kept going off. They were all asking questions that nobody had answers to. I took the rest of the day off and I met up with Greg. Together, we started looking through what little information was available online, called the contact at the police station and asked around on our socials about a guy with a snapping tick. Someone must have seen something, heard something. And luckily, we didn't have to wait long. Apparently, several people knew someone who matched Stuart's weird finger-snapping tic. "I met a girl at a pub who kept doing that over and over," one wrote. "I think I've seen some of my son's friends snapping like that," said another. "Have you checked the storage units? I've seen a guy like that go by at least twice a week." It wasn't much, but it was something. It was around 6 p.m. when we got there. The sun was about to set, casting long shadows that crawled up the walls. We went past row after row of green metal doors looking for the manager's office. It didn't take long to spot it. It was the only place that had some kind of lighting still going. We introduced ourselves and explained the situation. He knew exactly who we were talking about. "A guy comes by 2 or 3 times a week," he said. "You really think he hurt someone?" "Kidnapped," Greg clarified. "Not sure about hurting." "Well, I can't get you access to his unit, but I can show you where it is. You think that'll help?" "One can hope," I added. "We gotta try." We were escorted to the furthest corner of the lot, right under a broken streetlight. We stood there quietly for a moment, trying to discern if there were any sounds coming from inside. As far as we could tell, there wasn't. Greg wasn't about to let this slide, though. "We need to check it out," he said. "If this is Stuart's, there's gotta be something in there." "I can't let you do that," said the attendant. "Wouldn't be proper." I rolled my eyes at him. "How about if I happened to drop, say, 100? Wouldn't that make it more plausible that the lock was already broken by the time you got here?" "Make it 200. I did. We cracked the lock and slid the door open. The attendant wandered off, making sure that no one came to look. The less he knew, the better. It made it easier to feign ignorance. So the lock fell off and we got to work. At first, I didn't know what we were looking at. It was a storage unit, sure, but something didn't seem right. There was this large box in the middle of the room lined with felt and pillows. It looked like something that a big dog might sleep in. There were racks of hand-me-down clothes, probably from a Goodwill or donated by some charitable soul. I could tell that it was Stuart's. I had seen him wear them. This explained the smell. "You think he lives out of here?" Greg asked as he went through a box in the corner. "Maybe," I said. "I think the lock can open from the inside." "Nowhere to sleep, though. Well, maybe the box. He couldn't fit in there." I looked back at it. Maybe he could if he rolled into a fetal position. But who slept like that? There wasn't much in that unit. Clothes, a box, some shoes, and a couple of old books. Literary classics. Dostoevsky, Dumas, Bronte, big names. The trail seemed to end there until I looked a little closer. "They're library books," I said, checking the back. "This one was checked out last week." "It's something. Maybe they know him." "Maybe that's his shitty job," I asked. "You ever figured out what he actually does?" "No idea," Greg admitted. "Just sounds like any other job to me." It was a long shot, but we headed for the library. It was still open, but not for long. By the time we reached the front doors, I could see a librarian about to lock them. I managed to get the door open just in time as Greg came up the stairs panting. The librarian looked like she didn't know what to think. This was probably the most eventful thing to happen all day. Her surprised eyes looked even bigger from behind her large glasses. "Excuse me," I said. "Sorry, we're looking for someone. You know, a skinny man about this tall comes in here once or twice a week. He has this thing where he snaps his fingers when he's nervous. Do you know him?" She looked us over, shaking her head. "Sorry, we're about to close. You'll have to come back tomorrow." "It's important," Greg added. "I'm sorry, but it can't wait." "And I'm sorry, but I don't know who you're talking about. Now, if you wouldn't mind." I let the door go as she looked us over one final time. She shook her head and closed the door. And then her fingers snapped. It was so unexpected, I think it surprised her too. The same snap, and just like Stuart. Her face shifted instantly, like a deer staring down a 12-wheeler. She had the keys in the lock but hadn't turned them yet. I looked at Greg and he just went with it. He pulled the door open before she could turn the key. The door flew open as she backed away, snapping her fingers again. "I'm calling the cops. You can't be in here." "Why did you do that?" I asked, pointing at her hand. "Why'd you snap your fingers like that?" "I don't know what you're talking about." She did it again, and Greg fanned out to the left while I went straight ahead. Unless she bolted for the back, she was trapped. Our footsteps echoed off the walls and our shadows crawled up the cheap marble pillars. The overhead lights were already off, making every step into the library darker than the last. "How do you know him?" I asked. "What is this?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I heard it again. Snap, snap. But this time, she wasn't the one doing it. I held up a hand, silently asking Greg to stop. He did. The librarian backed away as we stopped to listen. All through the winding corridors ahead, we could hear it. Snapping, that same sound in different directions. 3, maybe 4 people. Footsteps coming up and down the stairs in the back. Someone running. The librarian took off. I was about to follow when Greg shook his head, backing away. We walked all the way back to the front door. "Hold on, I'm gonna go get something." He hurried outside, asking me to hold the door. The librarian had dropped her keys, so I snagged them and put them in my pocket. We didn't have much time, but something told me she wasn't about to call the cops on us. There was something going on. Greg rushed to his car and came back with a flashlight and a handgun. He took the gun, I took the flashlight. We went further inside, trying to navigate with a single beam of light. A couple of doors had been locked, but I had the keys to get through. It took some time to find the right one, though. Every now and then we could hear something moving, followed by the occasional snapping. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't know who to call or what to say. You can't call the cops on somebody for snapping their fingers, especially when you're the one doing the breaking and entering. We came to a staircase. There were clearly people above us. Whispers somewhere in the distance, some a little deeper, some a little lighter. I caught the occasional word. Looking, something something. Threat, something something. Curious, something. Greg looked up, keeping his gun at his side. I shone the flashlight up the stairs, hearing someone further up. It almost seemed like they were provoking us, daring us to chase them. The friendly posters on the walls asked visitors to visit their website or come by on special occasions. There was this one poster of a vibrant blue sunflower, asking guests to tell me your story, an invitation to their amateur writing circle. "We can't go up," I whispered to Greg. "I'm not buying it." "But they're up there," he whispered back. "Yeah, but the stairs go down too. They're being too obvious about this. I got a bad feeling." "All right," he nodded. "Let's go down." Another locked door and we were on our way. The staircase leading downward wasn't meant for guests. It led to an old bomb shelter. We never went inside the shelter itself, but we saw the signs. Solid concrete walls, ceiling, and floor. The air was stale and the temperature dropped. You could tell that you were going deeper and deeper underground. We didn't know what we were looking for. I hadn't considered that Stuart might have accomplices. I mean, yes, there had been 3 masked men at the red light when Nicole went missing, but I figured they were just some thugs for hire. But now things were looking different. Could it be his family? Were they so invested in him? We followed the tunnels further in, moving past rumbling pipes and humming maintenance lights. As the tunnels started to branch off, we had to make a tough decision. We weren't about to split up. So we had to figure out where we were heading, and we had to make sure that we didn't just go in a circle. And Greg had one idea and I had another. But then we heard it again, not too far off, that familiar snapping. There was this one tunnel that didn't seem right. It was slightly longer and there was a tilt to it. You could spot a strand of dirt along the edge of the left-hand side, showing that it was, in fact, leaning. It went a bit up, a bit down, and there were cracks along the ceiling. The overhead lights didn't work, so we had to trust the flashlight more than ever. Greg went first, keeping the handgun ready. The tunnel took a sharp left to a pair of double doors. They were completely covered in rust, to the point where we didn't know if we could crack them open. There was no need for a key here. This thing was a two-man job just to budget. Fortunately, the tunnel was small enough that we could prop ourselves up against the wall and push with our legs. Even then, it was a tremendous effort just to get through the worst of it. But once we pushed past a certain threshold, the door gave way. There was a large underground hall. It looked like a sort of theater stage. Even with the flashlight, we couldn't make out most of the ceiling. It's like the light was swallowed. We heard the snapping again. It sounded smaller and closer to the ground. I swept the flashlight over a crowd of old folding chairs, all set up for an invisible audience of about 100 people, maybe more. My mouth was drier than the concrete walls, making my tongue rough against the roof of my mouth. I could taste the dust on my teeth as I begged my heart to calm down. There was something further down on the floor. I pointed it out to Greg. It looked like a wooden doll. It was about 2 foot tall and had this completely neutral facade. No clothes and no facial features, just a simple wooden doll. Something that you might spot in an art class to practice poses. Looking a little closer, I could see these thin metal wires wrapped around its joints, reaching far up into the ceiling. One of the wires moved a little, making the doll raise an arm. As it did, the wire shifted. It was poorly tied and got stuck at a weird angle. So when the wire tightened, the joint corrected itself, making a snapping noise. Snap, snap. It moved, albeit just a little. It turned to us. I kept my light on it and Greg had his gun ready. I could hear his breathing getting louder as he mumbled something under his breath. The doll made a move as if reaching for something and then moved his arm back again, imitating the movement of pulling something heavy. And as it did, we heard the double doors grind open. Greg swung around, pointing his gun up. More than a dozen people silently crowded into the hall, dead-eyed, unblinking, and mechanical. None of them seemed to care that we were armed. With each that entered, I would hear the occasional snapping, both from them, the doll, and from other things in the dark. I had never seen these people before. Some young, some old, all varied and unique in different ways. They all had this look of a person who could be typecast in a movie or a commercial. The friendly neighbor, the kind receptionist, the clever middle schooler. "Stop," Greg mumbled. "You all stop right there and you tell us what the hell's going on." I didn't interrupt. I wanted to know too. Greg wasn't putting down his weapon and the strangers weren't backing down. They weren't advancing either. For a moment they just stood there as if considering something. I heard a snapping somewhere up in the dark of the ceiling. Then one of the strangers stepped out of the pack, a middle-aged woman. She had this completely neutral expression with her arms firmly folded at her side. She snapped her fingers as she walked a couple of steps down the stairs. Then, as if remembering that she was a person, she relaxed into natural movement. Something breathed life into her. Her arms relaxed as she raised a cigarette to her lips. "You boys aren't supposed to be down here. Are you lost?" "I know damn well we ain't," I said, my fingers cramping around the flashlight. "What'd you do with Nicole?" "Oh, Nicole, I don't know any Nicoles. What are you on about?" I looked back at the doll. It was mimicking her movements, and looking up into the ceiling, following the wires, I could hear something else. A voice, talking. I moved up next to Greg, poking him in the side. We looked up. A wheezing voice like someone trying to scream through a whisper. It was talking, but not to us, not directly. And Sandra tried to explain. No, not explain, convince. A breath later, the woman with the cigarette continued speaking. I think it'd be best for everyone if you just put that thing down, she said, nodding at Greg's gun. That won't solve anything. Yes, convince, the voice continued. She tried to make them at ease. Greg and I looked at one another. He was panting like a dog after a long run. I hadn't even noticed that I was too. I could see far more than a dozen people by the door now, and most had fanned out along the far wall. But our focus was up at the darkness covering the ceiling, the dark that not even our flashlight could pierce. She should try to use her womanly ways, the voice narrated. But she hadn't been feeling good about herself, not since the divorce. The doll swung out an arm and the woman followed. The wire wrapped around the doll's arm at a bad angle caused another snap. It translated into a couple more finger snaps from the woman. Look, she said, I know this is confusing. We can walk out of here together and go through this in greater detail. I know you have questions and I'd like to be the one to answer them. Greg aimed his gun at her. Enough. That caused a stir. A couple of wires rattled, sending a shiver through the crowd of people. They themselves didn't seem to have any wires attached. They were simply mimicking the movement of the doll. Or maybe there were several dolls. There were more wires overhead leading to other rooms and down other tunnels. You hear it too, I whispered to Greg. Yeah, he nodded. It's up there. How the simple-minded buffoons rallied behind their dying light, the voice croaked, praying that the narrator would take pity, that he would tell their story. There was a gasp and a snarl. A large glob of fluid dripped into a viscous water balloon. It smacked down on a folding chair, sending it reeling to the floor with a flip. No, that he would grant them purpose, that he would give them meaning. I blinked. Using the flashlight, I followed the edges of the wall upward. It dawned on me that I wasn't looking at an impossible darkness. There was something up there. It was a physical thing. Something darker than night covering the entire ceiling. I could see cracks in the concrete where it had pushed into the walls, anchoring itself to the ceiling. I could see movement like a shadow in a pond, or eyes moving under a closed eyelid. They pondered his magnificence, the voice continued, his boundless magnitude. I kept my head down looking at the strangers. The woman with the cigarette seemed bored, if anything. I pulled on Greg's shirt, urging him to come along as we moved further back. There was a side door near the stage, leading us further in. The backstage area was filled with debris. Part of the wall had collapsed, burying 3 bookshelves in dust and dirt. The air was so still that I could taste it all the way into my lungs. The ceiling there was equally dark, but much lower. If I had a long enough stick, I could poke it. There were tables filled with wood scraps and tools. I could see spools of metal wires along with piles and piles of notes and pencils. The ground had almost as many pencil shavings as it had dust and concrete. What the hell is that? Greg whispered, pointing at a table at the far end of the room. I thought it was a life-sized mannequin. I could see each piece, clearly separated and cleaned. It had some texture to it though. Looking closer, I could see why. It wasn't a mannequin. There was a man on the table, each piece of him separated, drained of blood and cleaned. Metal wires had been attached between each piece. They just needed to be tightened. They were assembling a person. Greg checked the notes on the side as I struggled to keep my dinner down. I don't know what's worse, the sight or the lack of smell. It's like it wasn't even a person anymore. It's a script, said Greg. A story. This is like a character in a story. A play. The ceiling rumbled as something moved. The voice was closer now, much closer. The curious creatures marveled over the brilliance of the script. Okay, what is that? Greg said. What is that? The angry man questioned the narrator, asking questions whose answers he was not entitled to. No, I'm not going to. Something came down like a pillar of dark, like a giant crushing a bug with the tip of his finger. It came down on Greg, something the size of a log, and pushed him to the ground. In a second, it cracked his spine and ribcage like a plump berry, and then lifted him up. He didn't even have time to finish his sentence. There was just the painful exhale before he was unceremoniously flung into nothing. Of course, the narrator would find use for the angry man. Another story to tell. No, a tale to weave. Yes. It was just me, my flashlight, and a tide of calmly encroaching strangers. I turned to the notes by the table, trying to get an idea of what to do. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. The scared man admired the craftsmanship. The voice continued. He wondered how a being this radiant could have escaped his notice for so long. It was all stories. Something was telling stories, using people like marionettes. The way it spoke, the way it wrote, it was obsessed. I had to try something, and if I played my cards right, maybe I could get some answers as I did. The scared man, I started. The scared man was too stupid to see what had become of Stuart and his darling girl. He prayed that the magnificent creature would tell him. There was a low growl, like a sinister purr. The magnificent creature pondered. It said that maybe the scared man hadn't considered Stuart a story told. Perhaps it was a tale so naturally perfected that it was mistaken for truth. So Stuart had been controlled by this thing, a story. That explained the snapping. And the darling girl, the one he was meant to court, she waited for his approval. My heart sank into my stomach. For Nicole, for Greg, for me. I was so out of my league that I couldn't even fathom it. In the back, I saw it pick up one of the strangers as casually as a child would pick up a toy. It disappeared into the darkness, just like Greg. You can't just take people, I said. You can't make them into something they're not. The scared man forgot his place. The narrator grew disinterested in his mewling. The ceiling roiled like waves on the ocean. A hand holding a gun dropped to the floor, bloodless, and then a foot. This wasn't working. I couldn't reason with it, and one wrong step would mean death. I took a deep breath, forcing my tongue back, and cleared my throat. The scared man knew the narrator was too clever to make a common mistake, I said. He would not possibly present his audience with such a banal story. The strangers tilted their heads in unison, like a dog trying to understand its owner's words. Stuart wasn't meant to end up with Nicole, I continued. Of course, the brilliant narrator knew this. He had played on our expectations. No, Stuart's story was one of tragedy, not romance. Yes. Something moved again. One of the strangers picked up a note from a table, writing frantically on the back. Yes, subversion. One by one, the strangers began to laugh. The same laugh from a dozen different mouths, all with the same cadence but different tunes. Yes, the narrator continued. The scared man was right. Stuart's story was not one of romance, but one of tragedy. He had trusted in his best friend, only to lose the love of his life. He would wander the streets, doomed to never find safe harbor for his bleeding heart. A few strangers started to write it down. The metal wires rattled, making them shake with excitement, like a kid who can't wait to run. I could hear more rattling overhead as little pieces would drop to the floor. A shoe, a watch, a hand. Meanwhile, I slipped into a side door. In a way, I wish I hadn't. There were people sitting on chairs with their heads slumped over. Men, women, children. All of them had blank papers ahead of them, neatly stacked and ready to be written. And in the very front was one that I recognized. Nicole. I kneeled in front of her, checking her pulse. Her hands were cold. She wasn't breathing. And what of dear Nicole? The voice continued. What fate would the narrator grant her? She was dead. There was no warmth, no pulse, no breath. She was held up by some unnatural force. Perhaps she would become another, the voice said. Perhaps she would move, see the world. I grabbed her hands and laid my head against her knuckles. As I did, one of the wires holding her together twanged, making her finger go snap. It was too late and it hadn't even been a day. Perhaps, I cried. Perhaps the scared man could take her home. Maybe you could make things right somehow. I brushed some hair out of her eyes, and as I did, they opened. Yes, the narrator wheezed. Perhaps he could. Nicole and I left that place together. It took her some time to adjust, but her legs straightened out well enough. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her thoughts narrated through the thing above. Oh, how lucky she was, it laughed. She wouldn't know she had been graced with the touch of death. She'd remember it all as a bad dream, a bump in the night from which her darling dearest had woken her. Its laugh haunted me all the way out of the library. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a practiced muscle movement, like the exhale of a sniffling beast. But we walked out of there, down the stairs, and back to Greg's car. I kicked the tires, screaming in frustration. As I did, a pair of keys tumbled down the stairs behind me. The angry man would see his friend soon, a stranger said, peering down from the library doors, and all would be well. Another day would come. Nicole would wake up, stretch, yawn, and go to brush her teeth. She would tell me about this crazy dream she had. We would have to explain to the police that she was fine, that it was all a misunderstanding. And she was fine, I suppose. Except for when she grabbed her coat. Her hand got snagged in her pocket, and as she turned her wrist, her fingers snapped. Snap, snap. And Greg made it home, albeit a bit later than he ought to. He seems fine as well. For some reason, he's picked up a couple of new interests, like he wants to live a new life, like someone is telling a different story than the one that he had. But in so many ways, he's still Greg, except for the occasional snapping of his fingers. In my heart of hearts, I know this isn't real. I know they're not who they look to be, and I know it's not their words that I'm listening to. But I'm okay with being lied to. I'll never say it out loud, but if this is just escapism, I'm okay with running far, far away, as long as Nicole is there. And Stuart, well, as far as I know, he still makes his way across town on the weekends. He's seen at dive bars and cheap nightclubs, trying his best to make a good impression. And of course he fails, as he was meant to. And as he snaps his fingers, I don't think he knows how deep his tragedy trails. Sometimes I snap my fingers too. I do it just for fun. I can choose to do it unlike them. But sometimes I have to ask myself if that's what they're telling themselves too. If we're doing the same thing, does the reason really matter? I've never dared to go back there. I don't know what would happen. I don't even know if Nicole is actually feeling anything, or if she's just a story being told. A blank puppet playing a part. You can read as many words as you want, but you can never read a soul. And as I lay down to sleep at night, I hold her close, and I wonder if you can truly love a story rather than a person. There's no free will here. Can it still mean something? I've thought about it for months at this point. I've talked about it, written about it, and I even thought about going back to see the narrator. I didn't, of course. I'm many things, but I'm not willing to hand over my life. And after all this time and pondering and anxious grieving, I have only one thing to say. I just don't know.
Susan Corndecki, Ray, Nelson Asada, Dice, Creamy, Meek, Asher, Dalamagara, That One Woodsman, Sonic, GMT, Leon Takio Cirilla, Mina Lynn Kidder, SWAT, Damon McCory, Mark Norman, yours truly, Dino, Lunas TV, Wayward Son, Deus Ex Nihilo, Big Country Allen, Pamela Shockley, Sleepy Shroomy, Caleb Windsor, Kathy McGuire, Page Martin, Richard Friends, Shrimp of the Shrimp, MP Massacre 91, Jacob Bartlett, Miss Eldridge, Casey Long, Justin Fonauer, Role, Sanjay Anthem, Lone Wolf Sam,